Going to tell you happened to me personally. In mid-October 1989, I, then still quite a young man, went on another adventurous kayak trip on the lakes of Karelia with my friend Dimka, who was 7 years older than me. Such trips usually took us about a week. That autumn we kayaked on the Suna River. The first few nights we spent in a tent, but on the fifth night, we accidentally stumbled upon a forest hut of local Karelians standing on one of the small wooded islands. In the evening, the weather deteriorated. Clouds came from somewhere. A fine, nasty rain was drizzling. And to find such a place to stay for the night was a great success. Having moored, we unloaded, pulled out, and turned the kayak over. I didn't have to look for the road for a long time. Only one path led to the hut. There was no way to get to the hut from the other sides, so everything there was overgrown with small bushes. At that time, they didn't still like they do now. There were enough utensils in the hut: mattresses, dishes, candles. There was even a kerosene stove. I'm not even talking about a week's supply of food, a whole shelf of liter glass jars in which cereals, pasta, and other food that can be stored for a long time were hidden from mice. There was even a small cellar in the hut, in which there was a can of stew, a couple of cans of pearl barley with pork, and even a bottle of vodka. Even in the cellar, for some reason, there was a small icon of Saint Nicholas the Saint. I now know who was depicted on the icon, and then orthodoxy was for me a white spot on the map of my world. The hut itself was a log cabin made of dead wood. The cracks between the logs were filled with dry moss. Bunks were arranged on the walls of the hut, and there was a table in the center between them, so it was convenient to sit at the table and sleep. The table rested with its narrow side against the end wall of the hut, and a window was cut right above it in the wall. Another window was above a small table, next to a metal stove. A small table, like a kitchen table, was immediately put together. A pine block was pushed under it, which served as a stool. In general, it was a very cozy and warm place. Even the front door was insulated from the inside with fiberglass with a thick layer of batting under it. There was no lock, of course. The door was just propped up with a pole so that the wind wouldn't accidentally open it. The door was locked from the inside with an ordinary hook. The day at the oars turned out to be tedious, but the fishing was pleasant. Behind the hut, as if to order, there was even a small metal smoker. The alder grew nearby, so there were deafeningly smelling smoked perches on the table for dinner. We did not get the check from the cellar. We had dark rum in a metal flask in stock for such a case. But the icon was taken out, put on the table. Just as we were about to have supper, there was a knock on the door. Dimka and I decided that one of the owners of the hut had descended and were already depressed, imagining another night in a tent. I didn't want to leave the heated hut in the cold dampness at all. However, it worked out. One of the local Carols, a short, stocky man, asked to stay with us. It's hard to remember how he was dressed now. In my opinion, he was wearing a padded jacket, some kind of unusual-looking hat, striped trousers tucked into boots. It was somehow not accepted to introduce themselves. Fate brought them together under one roof for one night, divorced, and the travelers dispersed, forgot each other. We invited the man to the table. He did not refuse. He sat down and took out a piece of bread wrapped in newspaper from the pocket of his quilted jacket. He nodded at the icon.
Did you get it from under the floor?
The man spoke with a pronounced Caerlean accent, emphasizing each vowel in the word, which made the speech sound somehow unusually solemn. Yes, they got it. But what's the big deal? Dimka and I were surprised at the question, in vain. He answered shortly, and he put the icon face down. After the fish and rum were finished, the man went to the kitchen table, sat down on a block and, lighting a pipe, went into himself. By the time it got dark, the drizzle was replaced by a fine snowball, so far short-lived, but predicting the coming winter. One candle was left burning on the table, and the evening in a hut in the middle of a remote forest by itself set us up in a mystical way. We discussed books for a long time, which we were really passionate about. Then the conversation turned to all sorts of topics concerning the spirit world. I told how my friends and I, having read Conan Doyle's spiritualistic novels, tried to do table turning, then suggested trying to drive a saucer. Dimka, who had been actively chatting earlier, suddenly fell silent here. I tried to continue the topic of spiritualism, but Dimka, somehow abruptly cutting me off, asked me to be silent. We smoked in silence for about 5 minutes, and then he started telling. About 10 years ago I served in a communications company. We were already going to the dim-up, when suddenly we were thrown into the exercises. Our company was located not far from Tambov, in an abandoned collective farm. The company was small, mostly special communications specialists. There were 4 of us in our company. I, Tolik the driver, Vitka the radio operator, and Slavik. Slavik was our center figure, the cook. All are already old-timers, as they used to say, grandfathers. Accordingly, we could afford more than other soldiers. We didn't have much work. There was enough time, and the guys and I went to play preference in the evenings. We played in the cowshed, which was 2 steps away from our tents. Yes, we were certainly not sitting in a cow stall. A corridor was made between the stalls of the cowshed, the floor of which was broken in places, rotten in places, but it was possible to pass with a flashlight. This corridor led us to the door leading to the recreation room. That's where we were sitting, and so, in the evening we gathered in the cowshed, lit a candle, sat down. Our stools were the same chunks as here in the hut, only much heavier, probably oak. We barely moved them. Slavko was late. The bullet is supposed to be painted for 3. Tolik did not play preference, and he did not want to play with the Hussar. Then Tolik suggested the idea. Let's, he says, summon spirits. I know how, and I'll teach you. Nothing complicated, but fun. In civilian life, then you will scare the girls. Everyone caught fire with the idea. Tolik said that he needed a piece of paper, a saucer, a candle, and a pencil. I had a pencil. Tolik found a saucer with a crack in the cupboard, and a layer of wallpaper, torn off by Vitka from the wall, came off as a sheet of paper. Tolik spread out a sheet on the table, marked it into sectors, and wrote letters and numbers. A saucer with a crack was placed on the sheet. A burning candle was placed in the left corner of the sheet, and it began. We placed 2 fingers of each hand on the saucer. First Tolik summoned the spirit of Napoleon, then someone else. I don't remember anymore. I remember that the saucer was rushing across the sheet. The crack pointed to the letters at such a speed that we barely had time to put them into words. We tried to catch which of us was moving the saucer, asked tricky questions from our own past. which no one should have known about. The spirits answered us any questions. It seemed that they knew everything about us, but even that wasn't enough for Tolik. He demanded that the spirits prove their reality. Then the nightmare began. The saucer froze abruptly. The candle went out immediately. We jumped to our feet. From the corridor leading to the recreation room, heavy rhythmic beats rang out. It took me a moment to realize that these were footsteps, so heavy and somehow slow someone was walking down the corridor. The closest comparison would probably be the tread of the commander's statue. In total darkness, no light could be seen through the cracks of the boards in the door, and I have already said that it is impossible to walk on such a rotten floor in complete darkness without a flashlight. Heavy footsteps, which made the floor shudder, were approaching. Tolik lit a candle. The thumping of footsteps stopped. There was a long pause. Everyone was looking at the door. It must have been 10 seconds, which lasted at least 5 minutes according to the inner feeling. The door slowly opened, and our Slavik came in, clutching a thermos to his chest. The picture would be funny if it weren't for Slavka's absolutely white face, looking fearfully in front of him. I looked back and saw that Slavik was looking at Vitka. Vitek, 6 feet tall, weighing a little more than 50 kilograms, was holding an oak block over his head, weighing no less than Vitka himself. The general's stupor was interrupted by a thud of a block falling to the floor behind Vitka's back. The candle went out again. When we lit it, we saw that the door was closed and Slavik was not in the room. Then a rustle on the table caught our attention. With horror, we watched as the saucer, crawling independently on a piece of paper, wrote enough, after which it split in half along the crack. Without any agreement, we rushed into the air, away from here. We didn't find Slavka that evening. He was found in the morning, outside the village. He was nailed with a pitchfork through his chest to the back wall of the barn. The blow was so strong that the chest was pressed in. Slavka's blue face was terribly distorted, as if he had been hit with a sledgehammer. His eye was hanging out on a nerve thread. I still dream about this picture. Tolik, as soon as he saw what happened to Slavka, went to the guardhouse, took the machine gun from the sentry and shot himself. Then there was an investigation. We were shaken up by different authorities, but soon got rid of it, blaming everything on Tolik. So from that day on, spiritualism was enough for me for the rest of my life. The night in the deep forest, the flickering light of a single candle standing in the middle of the table, the dim light of a pipe illuminating the thick eyebrows of the night guest in red, gave Dimka's story an understanding of how fragile and transparent the barrier separating the world of the unknown from our world is. It was the owner who was playing pranks then. The man broke the silence. You invited him and didn't treat him. So he got angry. He took his own. And who is this master? I asked. It happens in different ways. Sometimes Holsha is naughty. According to you, there will be a spirit. But your master was not a Holsha. He only took one. Holsha would have taken them all. Yours was one of the sorcerers. I didn't have time to give my strength to death. So I was furious, restless. How do you know? Dimka got wound up. I know. And it's time for you to go to bed. The guy puffed on his pipe, and we were knocked out, just like anesthesia. All that the peasant was no longer there. Deciding that he had left quietly, they quickly boiled the kettle on the stove, at the same time burning the remains of yesterday's dinner in it. While waiting for boiling water, we got ready for the road. But when we opened the door, we were a little surprised. More precisely, they were stunned. The snow that had fallen that night lay in a thin layer all over the clearing surrounding the hut, and there were no tracks on this snow, either to the hut or from the hut. Thinking that the man decided to prank us, we returned to the hut. There was absolutely nowhere to hide there, but we checked everything possible. They looked under the bunks, stuck their nose into the basement. The icon of Saint Nicholas the Saint was again lying in the cellar. The man was nowhere to be found. The only evidence of his visit was a package left on the table. Having unfolded it, we were stunned for the second time. In a piece of the newspaper Caerleon Commune, dated as early as July 20, 1928, a hefty cracker of rye bread was wrapped, completely inedible because of its fossilization. The bundle also flew into the oven, where it immediately flared up as if the bread was soaked in alcohol. We took our luggage and went to the shore, where an overturned kayak was lying. There we were stunned for the third time. The paper-thin morning shore ice was untouched along the entire coast. That is, no one sailed to the island or sailed away. The weather in the morning did not resemble yesterday at all. It was completely calm. The kayak cut through the perfect mirror of the lake, which reflected the blue sky. The air was crystal clear, icy in the morning. The kayak seemed to hang between the water and the sky, and it was unclear where one ends and the other begins. The sun has already risen above the horizon, breaking through the golden autumn crowns of trees growing along the shores of the lake. The bark of the pines in these rays also seemed golden. The whole landscape breathed such peace that all our night experiences began to slowly fade in memory. But still, we had to be surprised again. Having sailed out from behind the island, about 100 meters away we saw a waving ball of gray fog in a small cove. Having decided at least to figure out what's what, we swam to this ball. But before they had swum a dozen meters, they saw a Carrica boat floating out of this ball, in which two women were sitting. Both had desperately smoking pipes sticking out of their mouths. Well, they smoked themselves. Dimka snorted. We laughed softly, restrained ourselves so as not to accidentally overturn the loaded kayak, but we still swam to the boat. It was interesting what kind of guy spent the night with us. After listening to our description of the man, one aunt said, "This is Fedka Lesonin, our Padvashka. He was a good guy. He didn't refuse any weddings. Only he died a long time ago, about 50 years ago. My mother told me about him, how he suffered. He could not give his strength to anyone. Our Komsomol members were already there. They didn't believe in fairy tales. They didn't want to know a sorcerer. Everyone has forgotten how much good he has done to people. Yes, that's right. Fedka. He was still alive. He raised my father to his feet when his back was broken by a pine tree. And even now, sometimes, it seems to people said the second, well, since you're alive, it means you've looked at our Padvashka. Whoever leaves him alive won't get sick for a year. The first one added, he didn't leave you anything there. Asked the second, I left it, a rotten cracker in an old newspaper. And did they take it? No, of course not. They burned it in the stove. What fools. He left his strength to you through bread. Now you can't turn around in the hut. It will be bad. Fedka has become angry now. You won't leave alive anymore. Puzzled, Kelka and I said goodbye. After 3 or 4 hours, we sailed out to the cuttings, where we braked a passing logging truck that dropped us off at the railway station. We never visited those parts again. I don't know if Fitka helped or our hiking hardened me, but since the trip for 2 years I have never sneezed. I repent about the burnt-out power. I remembered more than once. I regretted that I burned it.